Ladies and gentlemen, in this Red Gaming Tentacom video, we're going to be taking a look at an interview by Digital Extremes regarding the PlayStation 4. Digital Extremes, of course, are well known for developing Warframe, which is also going to be on the PlayStation 4's launch. It's currently doing rounds on Steam and other PC-like architectures, and of course, they are discussing the technical power of the PS4, as well as how PC-like it is in terms of design, as well as talking about the DualShock 4 and other bits and pieces as well. Now, what we do know, of course, about Digital Extremes, their title, is that it is free-to-play and it's co-op and so forth, and as I said, it will be available on launch. Most importantly, it will feature negligible differences between the PC version and the PS4, and interestingly, will support cross-play between the PlayStation 4 and PC. There will be no content difference between the two builds. In other words, it will be seamless integration. One of the things that I'm sure many of you will probably have ascertained by now in the coverage of the PS4, especially if you've been watching my channel, I've been speaking a lot about how difficult it is to develop titles on consoles, especially more traditional Xbox 360 and PS3 architecture, and by traditional I mean traditional in terms of that generation of technology, not traditional in terms of x86. But of course, now we're moving on to the x86/64 technology, and it's a hell of a lot easier to port games from PC to console. And you may remember a recent discussion I had regarding a Mark Cerny interview, and he was talking about what's known as time to triangle. And this is basically how long it takes developers on average to put together reasonable graphics on screen, and by which I don't mean like one or two polygons or triangles actually flying about. I'm talking about like a decent scene that is animated. And they're trying to get this back to the PS1 levels, which was 1 to 2 months. But as it turns out, the PS3 is 6 to 12. However, Digital Extremes were actually talking about this somewhat in this interview. Not exactly from this angle, but they were talking about just how quick it was to convert a PC game to PS4. I'm going to read you guys out a quote. They approached us actually. I guess it's coming up to about 4 months ago now. We were in our open beta and rocking the Steam charts there, and Sony got in contact with James, who's the owner of the company, and said, "Hey, what would you think about bringing Warframe over to our next generation console?" We had probably a 30-second conversation about if we should do it, and Sinclair added, Sony squeezed themselves into sending us as many development kits as possible, and 3 months later, we were on the E3 show floor at the PS4 showing with Warframe playable. I'll also continue with another quote. He also said, Warframe has supported 64-bit and DX11 for a long time, and there's a lot of commonality in that sort of architecture and what we're doing for the PS4. They've got a lot of cores in there, so I was a bit surprised how fast we got it up and running. I think Sony was as well. When we went to E3, people said, "Holy smokes, this is on the PS4, it looks amazing." Maybe that was just the Warframe fans trying to appease us, but they said it, one of the best looking games they ever saw at the show. In 3 months' time, that's a testament to how developer friendly this version of the PlayStation is. It is absolutely awesome. What surprised me most is how kick-ass the GPU is. The graphics are super, super high-end. Meanwhile, he also spoke a little bit about the DualShock 4, which of course is very important in pretty much any title, the controller I mean, but it makes a special difference in an FPS, so this is what he had to say about it. There are cool things on the PS4 that we are taking advantage of. The DualShock 4 is the best game controller I've ever put my hands on. I'm so excited about it. It has touchscreen controls. At E3 we showed the little swipe gestures to activate your Warframe abilities that people thought were really cool. And these are just special features like the share button, all those integrated features where you can just say, I did this really cool thing in Warframe, and that just pushes it out over your network. So end quote. Once again, a lot of this stuff is going over what we know already. One of the reasons that they went for the specifications they did, primarily, in other words, the unified memory, and more to the point from the unified memory, the fact that they didn't actually go with an ES RAM. Now, originally, Early on in development, apparently, from what I understand from a Mark Cerny interview, and you guys should check it out, by the way, it's on YouTube. It's about, I don't know, 40 minutes or so you'll know which one it is. I can't honestly remember what it's called offhand, but it's pretty easy to find. Anyway, when he was speaking, one of the things he said was early in development of the PS4, they actually got to the point where they had a decision, either go with less GDDR5 RAM bandwidth and go with ESRAM, or whether to go with pure GDDR5 but end up with less bandwidth overall. But, of course, all of the memory, in other words 8 gigabytes, has access to that high bandwidth, which of course is completely contrary to how the Xboxes are put together. Now, to be fair to Warframe and the PlayStation 4 and PCs, the actual specifications of what's required for the minimum requirements for the game are actually fairly low. You're looking at an E6400/Athlon X64 4000. That's a dual-core system, in other words. Windows XP onwards, 2 gigs of memory, which of course is not that much at all, and something along the lines of a Radeon 3600 or a GeForce 8600, as well as a DirectX 9, 2 gigs of space. In other words, not really that high. Of course, many developers themselves, including the guys behind Killzone, Guerrilla, have actually spoken quite heavily about the PS4's GPU capabilities as well as the CPU capabilities. It'll be very interesting from my point of view to see how this develops, because obviously there's a lot of talk about this right now from the perspective of, well, PC developers and indie developers primarily as well. Because obviously one of the benefits of making your system easy to work with, there were a couple, which I could probably do in another video, because if I actually really dug into it, there are quite a number. But two of the biggest ones: one, if you're a big development team, it reduces your cost, and two, if you're a small development team, it actually makes it possible to work on multiple projects simultaneously, and actually makes it even possible to port it over, because some titles on the PS3, for example, they just didn't happen, or it took a long time for them to come over. In other words, when the project had more funding, simply because of the PowerPC architecture behind them. I think one thing is definitely for certain, though, developers are definitely loving the PS4. Now, it's worth noting the Xbox One itself has very similar architecture to the PS4 in many different ways, but one of the problems, of course, that many developers are having with it is the memory. And it will be very interesting to see, just in the long term, how the difference in memory bandwidth and how the memory is allocated to the system. Of course, the 32 megabytes of onboard memory is basically strapped right there onto the GPU/CPU combination, or with the APU to be more precise. And it'll be very interesting to see if that small amount of memory, which actually allows them to have maximum bandwidth, in other words, the ESRAM is what gives the most bandwidth on the whole hardware. It'll be very interesting if that very small amount of memory is going to be enough to give them performance that they really need for certain titles. Another point, of course, is GPU clock speed right now. So GPU cores are obviously a lot less than the PS4, so GPU computational power is going to be less as well. I'm interested if either of those two things are going to bite Microsoft in the butt when it comes to these type of games. Regardless, one thing is for certain: owners of either PC, Xbox, or PS4 are going to be very happy with these changes, because one thing I personally hope from a PC perspective, primarily I'm a PC gamer, I'm hoping that PC ports will be a hell of a lot better than what they have been recently, because of the architecture commonality between, of course, all the different systems. Regardless, I think that's just about it for this particular video. Hopefully you found it somewhat intriguing. I will hopefully see you soon. Take care, and bye for now.